The universe, in its infinite complexity, operates according to rules. Not suggestions, rules. The laws of thermodynamics do not negotiate. The speed of light does not make exceptions. Subspace, that invisible architecture underlying faster-than-light travel, follows mathematical principles so precise that a deviation of a single variable can be detected, cataloged, and explained within minutes by a galaxy-class starship's computer. Captain Jean-Luc Picard had built his career on that certainty. He had faced the Borg, endured Q's capricious games, navigated temporal paradoxes, and stared down the Romulan Empire across a conference table. In every case, no matter how strange, the universe had eventually yielded an explanation. It was about to stop cooperating. The Enterprise D was completing a survey of the Maricore system, 3 light-years from the neutral zone, when Lieutenant Commander Data's head tilted precisely 4.7 degrees to the left. His tell, the one that meant something had happened that didn't fit. "Captain," Data said from Ops, his golden fingers moving across the console with mechanical serenity, "I am detecting a subspace rupture bearing 214 Mark 7. It is not consistent with any known natural phenomenon. The energy signature does not match wormhole formation, quantum filament activity, or Romulan cloaking device residue." Picard rose from the command chair, smoothing his uniform. On screen, the stars wheeled, and there it was. A tear. That was the only word for it. Not a wormhole's elegant spiral, not the clean mathematics of a transwarp conduit. A tear, ragged and gold-white, crackling at its edges like something had punched through reality from the other side with tremendous, furious force. The light bleeding through it was the wrong color for any star in the Federation's charts. "Shields up," Worf said from tactical without being asked. "Confirmed," Picard said. "Yellow alert. Data, can you characterize that energy?" "I am attempting to do so, Captain. The radiation profile suggests—" Data paused. Another 4.7-degree tilt. "Sir, there is a life form inside the rupture." "One life form?" "Confirmed. Small. Approximately the mass of a human child. The bio readings are—" Data paused again, and on an android who did not pause, it was alarming. "They are extraordinary." The rupture pulsed once, a single brilliant heartbeat of gold, and then it collapsed. Gone, as if it had never existed. And something materialized on the bridge. Not through the transporter, not through any system Geordi LaForge would later be able to explain, though he would spend 11 days trying. One moment the space between the con and the view screen was empty. The next it contained a child. He was small, clearly young, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, with wild black hair that spiked in every direction and large dark eyes that were, in this first instant, closed. He wore a strange uniform, an orange and dark blue garment that looked almost martial in cut, belted at the waist, with weighted wristbands that thudded against the deck when he dropped to one knee. He was bleeding from a gash across his left cheek. His right hand was pressed to his ribs. His breathing was labored, but the sensors were screaming. "Captain," Worf's voice was low and tight. "Oh, the child is generating an energy field equivalent to—" He stopped, looked at his console, looked again. "The sensors may be malfunctioning." "Are they?" Picard asked. "No, sir. The child's bioelectric output currently exceeds our warp core at 60% output, and it is decreasing. This appears to be a diminished state." Silence on the bridge, the kind that falls when intelligent people encounter something that rejects every framework they have. The boy opened his eyes. They were dark, deep, and heartbreakingly exhausted. They moved across the bridge, the view screen, the consoles, the curved Federation architecture, the crew in their colored uniforms, with the rapid assessment of someone trained to evaluate threats. Not a child's wide-eyed wonder, a warrior's threat analysis, wearing a child's face. Then something shifted in that gaze. The threat assessment completed. Conclusion reached, not hostile, and underneath it, swimming up through exhaustion and pain, and something far older than any 11-year-old should carry, confusion. Profound, lost, bewildered confusion. He said something. The words were unknown, melodic, structured, clearly a real language, but nothing in the Universal Translator's database. He said it again, softer. A name, Troy would later say. He was saying someone's name. Deanna Troy had not moved from her chair beside the captain's. She was a Betazoid ship's counselor, trained to read emotion the way other people read faces. In her career, she had sensed the cold satisfaction of a Romulan commander, the hive contentment of a Borg drone severed from its collective, out the ancient loneliness of a being who had lived 300 years. She had developed, she believed, a reasonably calibrated sense of scale. The boy looked at her, just looked for a moment, and every calibration she owned broke. "Captain," her voice came out carefully, the way you carry something fragile. "This child is in tremendous pain, grief, recent, acute, devastating loss." She paused. "And underneath it, underneath everything, there is power. I cannot find the bottom of it. I've never—" She stopped, tried again. "I've never sensed anything like this. It doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like standing next to a star." Picard descended from the command platform slowly, deliberately, the way he approached every first contact, with absolute, unperformable calm. He stopped 3 meters from the boy and clasped his hands behind his back. "All right, I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise," he said, clearly and without condescension. "You are safe here. You have my word." The universal translator hummed, processing. The boy stared at him. Then slowly, with the dignity of someone who had been raised to show no weakness even at their worst, he straightened. He pressed one fist to the deck and pushed himself to his feet. He was short, barely chest height to Picard, but he stood like someone accustomed to standing in front of things much larger than himself. He spoke again, still unknown, but the tone had changed. He was introducing himself. "Fascinating," Data said quietly at Ops. "His linguistic structure suggests a highly developed civilization with a complex honorific system. The universal translator requires more sample language to achieve translation lock, but preliminary analysis suggests the word he repeated is a proper noun, likely his name." "Give it time," Picard said. He did not look away from the boy. "We'll get there." Dr. Crusher's voice came over the comm. "Bridge, my medical sensors are going absolutely haywire down here. Whatever just came aboard, I need to examine it." "Him," Troy corrected quietly. "Him," Beverly amended without missing a beat. "Now, Jean-Luc." Picard nodded slowly. He gestured toward the turbo lift. Open, gentle, an invitation rather than a command. "Will you come with me? We have a doctor. She can help with your injuries." The boy looked at the turbo lift, looked at Picard. His dark eyes were doing that calculation again, reading intent, measuring sincerity, assessing risk with an accuracy that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with a life lived in the gravity of something enormous. He nodded. Once, carefully. Worf exhaled through his nose. "I will accompany them." "Worf," Picard glanced back. "We will not be needing a security escort." "I will accompany them," Worf repeated in the tone that meant he had already decided. Picard looked at the boy, this small, bleeding, impossibly powerful child who had fallen through a hole in the universe saying someone's name, and for the first time in a long career of first contacts, felt the particular weight of encountering something genuinely, completely new. "Very well, Mr. Worf," he said. "Let's get our guest to sickbay. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper." Sickbay on the Enterprise D was designed to handle the medical needs of over 1,000 crew members, species ranging from Bolian to Vulcan, injuries spanning plasma burns to Borg assimilation attempts. Beverly Crusher had treated things that had no business being alive and brought them back anyway. She was not, by any professional measure, easily rattled. She was rattled. "Stand still," she said for the third time, holding the medical tricorder steady. "I need you to stand still." The boy, Gohan, the translator, was beginning to suggest, assembling phonemes into something approximating a name, was not being uncooperative. He was standing perfectly still. The problem was the tricorder. Every time she brought it within 30 centimeters of his torso, the readings spiked into ranges the device wasn't engineered to display and defaulted to a cascading error state. She had already gone through 2 units. She was on her third. Data, she said without turning around. I need you in here. Data was already there. He had followed from the bridge with the quiet inevitability of a man who understood that this situation required his specific skill set. He stood at the secondary console, his amber eyes moving between his own readings and the boy sitting on the biobed, and his expression, which communicated nothing in the conventional sense, communicated everything to anyone who knew him well enough. He was deeply, profoundly intrigued. His cellular structure is consistent with human baseline, Data reported, and with significant deviations. Mitochondrial density is approximately 40 times the human norm. Muscle fiber composition suggests a cellular memory of repeated catastrophic stress and recovery, far beyond what conventional biology would permit. His skeletal density is, Data paused, recalibrated. His skeletal density is approximately equivalent to duranium alloy. He's a child, Crusher said. He is, Data agreed. A child whose biology has adapted to conditions that would be lethal to any known humanoid species. The adaptations are not genetic anomalies. They are acquired. He has earned this physiology. Picard stood near the door, arms folded, watching. Troy sat beside the biobed at a careful, respectful distance from the boy, close enough to maintain empathic contact, far enough not to crowd him. Worf stood at the opposite wall doing an impression of someone who was relaxed. Gohan was watching Data. It was the particular attention children reserve for things they cannot categorize. Intense, unguarded, filtering through none of the social performance adults use to mask curiosity. Data looked back at him with equal directness, because Data always looked at things directly, and for a moment the android and the boy regarded each other with the mutual fascination of two beings who each understood, in their respective ways, what it meant to not quite fit the world around them. Gohan said something. The translator chimed softly, still building, still assembling, but a fragment resolved, not human? He is asking about you, Mr. Data, the computer confirmed, approximating confidence at 62%. Correct, Data said. He turned fully toward Gohan and addressed him with the formal courtesy he extended to all beings, regardless of their capacity to understand. I am an android, an artificial life form. I was constructed rather than born. He paused, tilting his head. I mention this because I have found that transparency regarding one's nature tends to facilitate communication more effectively than allowing misconceptions to persist. Gohan stared at him for a long moment. Then he pointed at Data, then at himself, and said something the translator caught as approximately, strong, you also. Different. In certain respects, Data said, yes. Something in the boy's posture shifted. Not relaxation exactly, but a fractional lowering of the defensive architecture he'd been maintaining since he arrived. A recognition. Here was someone who understood what it was to be categorically unlike the people around you. Troy felt it and kept her face neutral, but she noted it. The wound on his cheek is already healing, Crusher said, pulling everyone's attention back to the medical reality of the situation. She pointed at the gash, the one that had been actively bleeding 20 minutes ago. It was now pink scar tissue. I haven't touched it. His body closed it on its own. In 20 minutes. Accelerated cellular regeneration, Data said, consistent with his overall biology. Beverly. Picard unfolded his arms and moved closer, lowering his voice. In your medical assessment, is he in danger? Crusher looked at her tricorder, looked at the boy. He's exhausted. His energy levels, whatever they are significantly below what even our broken readings suggest is his baseline. He has multiple healed fractures in his left arm, recent within the last several hours. His cortisol equivalent is, she stopped. Jean-Luc, his stress hormone levels are consistent with someone who has just survived a significant trauma. Not a battle, a loss. Picard was quiet for a moment. Counselor? Troy nodded. She had been sitting with it since the bridge, holding the shape of what she sensed from the boy, trying to find words that were adequate. The grief is the loudest thing, she said carefully. It's fresh, raw. He lost someone very recently. Someone central, a parent, I think. The emotional signature feels She paused, searching. Paternal. He lost his father. The room was quiet. Gohan had been watching Troy during this. His translator access was growing. The computer was an extraordinary piece of engineering, and his language, while utterly foreign, had enough structural regularity to accelerate the process. He caught perhaps a third of what she said. Enough. His jaw tightened. His hands resting on his knees closed slowly into fists. Not in anger. Troy felt no anger. In the effortful, practiced containment of someone who had decided, at some point recently, that they were not going to fall apart. Not here. Not now. Not in front of strangers in an impossible place. It was an act of will that Troy found, unexpectedly, heartbreaking. He was 11 years old, and he was holding himself together with the discipline of a soldier. Gohan, she said. His name, just his name. And with the particular gentleness she had learned over years of sitting with people at their worst, he looked at her. The fist stayed closed. You are safe here, she said. What you're feeling, we can see it. You don't have to hide it. The translator hummed, delivered the words. Gohan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Picard, who had not moved from his position, and was watching the boy with an expression that was careful and grave, and if you knew Picard, deeply empathetic. Then at Data, who was watching him with open, uncomplicated curiosity, and something that might, in an android, approximate respect. Then Gohan said something that the translator, at 78% confidence, rendered as, my father gave his life to save everyone. I should have been stronger. No one spoke. Worf, from his wall, looked at the deck. Picard drew a slow breath. He had lost people. He had held men and women as they died, carried the weight of decisions that cost lives, survived Borg assimilation, and returned to lead. He knew grief that wore the shape of responsibility, the specific torture of believing that the outcome was yours to have changed. He walked to the biobed and sat down across from the boy, the way he sat across from diplomats. Equal level, full attention, no performance of authority. What is your name? He asked. The translator had enough now. The boy straightened. Gohan, he said. Son Gohan. Gohan, Picard repeated, with the precise pronunciation the boy had used. I am Jean-Luc, and I would like you to tell me, when you're ready, where you come from. He paused. Not because we need to know. Because I think you need to say it. Gohan looked at him for a long time. Outside, through the sickbay viewport, the stars held their positions with the indifference of things that have existed longer than grief and will exist long after it. The Enterprise moved through them at impulse, carrying something it didn't yet have the instruments to measure, tended by people who were, despite all their limitations, trying very hard to be kind. It was, Troy thought, a very human response to the impossible. And for the first time since he arrived, Gohan almost smiled. The holodeck was Geordi LaForge's idea, and in retrospect, he would acknowledge it was not his best one. The reasoning was sound enough. Gohan's language acquisition was accelerating. By hour 6, the universal translator had achieved 91% confidence. Enough for genuine conversation, but communication and understanding were different things. The boy could now exchange words with the crew. What he couldn't do was demonstrate what he was, and what he was mattered enormously to every question the Enterprise currently faced. Where had he come from? How had he arrived? What were the mechanics of his energy output? Could it be replicated, contained, or studied? Geordi's proposal, give Gohan a controlled environment where he could show them his capabilities without risking the ship. The holodeck's structural integrity fields could absorb significant punishment. They had tested it against Worf. They had not tested it against anything like Gohan. All right, Geordi said. I standing at the holodeck arch with a PADD and the enthusiasm of an engineer who has just encountered a problem interesting enough to make him forget to be nervous. We've programmed an open terrain environment, no population, plenty of space. You can, he gestured broadly, show us what you can do, at whatever level you're comfortable with. Gohan stood in the entrance to the holodeck looking at the rendered landscape. Rolling hills, open sky, a horizon that the Arch's system suggested went on indefinitely. He had been in the ship for 6 hours. He had eaten 3 times. which had impressed the replicator's portion algorithms and genuinely delighted Counselor Troy, who had documented it as a positive psychological indicator. He had slept for 40 minutes and woken as if launched. When he had asked 11 questions about the Enterprise that were, Data noted privately, exactly the 11 questions a combat-experienced tactician would ask about an unfamiliar vessel. Now he looked at the holodeck the way he'd looked at everything since arriving, assessing, measuring, deciding. This place isn't real, he said. It wasn't a question. The environment is holographically generated, Data confirmed from beside Geordi. Hard light technology. The ground beneath your feet will respond as genuine terrain for most, he paused, for most applications. Gohan nodded. He stepped through the arch. He stood in the middle of the rendered field for a moment, eyes closed, and did something that Geordi's visor couldn't interpret and Data's sensors could only partially track. He breathed, deliberately, pulling something inward, gathering it, on the way a singer finds a note before committing it to the room. Then he opened his eyes and they were teal, not a trick of the holodeck lighting, not a sensor artifact. His eyes, previously dark brown, had shifted to a vivid electric teal, and his hair, the wild black spikes, had risen, crackling at the tips with a golden light that was not bioluminescence, not plasma discharge, not any category in the Federation's scientific taxonomy. Super Saiyan, he said, for the translator's benefit. The word was his own language. No Federation equivalent existed. This is the first level. Geordi's visor was cycling through spectrum after spectrum, each one more overwhelmed than the last. Data, he said quietly, are you getting this? I am, Data said, and with a particular inflection that meant, I am getting this and I do not know what to do with it. The energy reading coming off Gohan in Super Saiyan state was not simply large. It was structured. It had layers. A biological base layer, something that functioned analogously to bioelectric field generation, wrapped in a second layer that operated more like a directed energy field, contained and shaped by what appeared to be an act of conscious will. The Federation had encountered species with bioelectric abilities. The Ecocid, the Zalconian, the Betazoid neurological field. None of them looked like this. This was not a passive biological trait. This was a technology that was also a physiology that was also somehow a philosophy. The Kai, Gohan said, while catching their expressions with the perception of someone used to explaining himself to people who had no framework for him. It's energy, life energy. Everything alive has it. I learned to use mine. He paused. My father was better at it than anyone. The past tense landed quietly in the holodeck. Can you demonstrate a controlled output? Data asked. At whatever magnitude you judge appropriate for this environment. Gohan looked around the holodeck space, calculating. Then he raised one hand, palm forward, and produced a Kai blast roughly the size of a grapefruit, contained, precise, and traveling at a velocity that Geordi's visor clocked at approximately 60% the speed of light before it impacted the far holodeck wall, and the structural integrity field activated with a sound like a thunderclap. The wall held, barely. Yeah, okay, Geordi said, making a note. Okay, that was controlled. Yes, Gohan said with the particular patience of someone who has spent years being the most powerful person in any room and has learned to be careful about it. What is the upper threshold of your capability? Data asked. Gohan was quiet for a moment. I don't know exactly, he said. When I fought Cell, he stopped. Something moved through his expression, fast and dark, and was controlled before it could settle. At the Cell games, when I reached the second level, Super Saiyan 2, he paused. The KI blast I fired then, the final one. He looked at Data with those teal eyes. It destroyed a being that could have destroyed the planet I come from. Data processed this. Your planet, he said carefully. A Class M world? Approximate mass comparable to Earth? Yes. The energy required to destroy such a body, Data said, would be in the range of 2.25 times 10 to the power of 32 joules. He paused. You are telling me that you generated and controlled energy in that range, at age 11. I'm not sure of the exact number, Gohan said, but yes. Geordi sat down on the holographic grass because his legs had made a decision without consulting him. And your father? Data continued, because Data did not have a circuit that told him when a question was too much. He was more powerful than this? He was. The answer was immediate, certain, and cost something visible. He trusted me to finish it. When he died, he believed I could, that I was stronger than him. Were you? Data asked. Gohan looked at the scorch mark on the holodeck wall. In that moment, he said quietly, yes, but I would have given anything for it not to be true. Data was silent for 3 seconds, an eternity for him. I believe I understand, he said finally. You do not experience your power as a gift. Not always. Fascinating, Data said. And then because he was Data, and he had no filter between observation and speech, and because sometimes that absence of filter produced a kind of accidental grace, your father must have trusted you a great deal. Gohan looked at him. The teal faded slowly from his eyes. The golden light settled. He powered down and he was just a boy again. Small, tired, wearing orange, standing in a room that wasn't real on a ship that shouldn't exist in any universe he'd known. He did, Gohan said. That was when the holodeck arch chimed. And Worf's voice came through. LaForge, you need to see what just appeared on long-range sensors. Geordi tapped his comm badge, already standing. What is it? A Romulan warbird, Worf said, decloaking, and it is not responding to hailing frequencies. Geordi looked at Gohan. Gohan looked back, and his expression had shifted entirely. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had moved to the back, and what was in the front was the alert, reading stillness of someone who had learned that danger arrives without announcement and must be met without hesitation. He was 11 years old. He looked ready. The Romulan warbird Devortex held position 40,000 kilometers off the Enterprise's port bow and continued to say nothing. This was, in the language of interstellar brinkmanship, quite loud. Waka Picard stood at the center of the bridge, with his hands clasped behind his back and his face arranged in the expression that his senior staff had privately categorized as diplomatic immovability. The one that said he was prepared to stand here indefinitely and that whoever blinked first would find the experience instructive. Riker stood to his right, arms folded, doing the version that was slightly more willing to escalate. Worf stood at tactical, doing the version that had already escalated internally and was awaiting authorization to do so externally. Still no response to hailing frequencies, Worf reported. They are maintaining shields. Weapons are powered but not locked. Weapons powered but not locked, Riker repeated quietly to Picard. They want us to know they're armed without committing to hostility. They want us to know they know, Picard said, about our passenger. Data back at Ops had spent the 7 minutes since the Warbird's appearance in a state of focused, silent computation. Captain, he said, I have been analyzing the timing of the Devortex arrival. The subspace rupture that brought Gohan aboard generated an energy discharge that would have been detectable at significant range, potentially as far as the neutral zone. If the Tal Shiar maintains sensor arrays in this sector, which available intelligence suggests they do, they would have logged the event within minutes of its occurrence. And dispatched the ship immediately, Picard finished. At maximum warp, yes. The timing is consistent. Picard turned. Gohan was standing near the turbolift. Picard had brought him to the bridge deliberately, a calculated decision that Riker had questioned with his eyebrows, and Picard had overruled with his posture. If the Romulans were here because of the boy had a right to understand what that meant. Gohan was watching the warbird on the view screen with an expression Picard was coming to recognize, the assessment expression, reading the shape of a threat. The large ship, Gohan said. It followed the energy from when I arrived. We believe so, Picard said. They want me. We don't know that yet, Riker said. Gohan looked at him with dark eyes that had seen the Cell games. Yes, you do, he said, without accusation. Just certainty. Riker opened his mouth, closed it, conceded the point with a slight nod. The view screen flickered, and then the Romulan bridge resolved into view without the Enterprise having opened a channel. The Devortex had forced the connection, a deliberate demonstration that the conversation would happen on their terms, or not at all. The commander who appeared was a woman of perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the angular features and measured composure that the Romulan Imperial fleet cultivated with the same intentionality that Starfleet cultivated its idealism. Her uniform bore the insignia of a sub-commander, but her eyes carried the particular quality Picard associated with Tal Shiar operatives, the look of someone who had decided what they wanted before the conversation began. "Captain Picard," she said. Her Federation standard was flawless, faintly accented, deployed like a precision instrument. "I am Sub-Commander Velas of the IRW Devortex, and I will be brief as I believe we are both people who appreciate efficiency." "I appreciate many things," Picard said, "efficiency among them, though I also appreciate proper hailing protocols." Velas acknowledged this with a millimeter of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The energy event in this sector 43 minutes ago was significant enough to warrant immediate investigation. The Romulan Star Empire has an interest in anomalous phenomena that occur near the neutral zone." "This is Federation space," Riker said. "By a comfortable margin, yes," Velas agreed, as if this were a minor administrative detail. "Nevertheless, our sensors detected a life form of extraordinary output aboard your vessel. We would like to examine it." "Him," Troy said from her chair, with a composure that matched Velas's precisely. A fractional pause. "Him," Velas corrected without inflection. "We would like to examine him, in the interests of mutual scientific inquiry." "No," Picard said. The word landed in the channel like something dropped from a height. Simple, undecorated, final. Velas looked at him. "Captain, he is a sentient being who arrived on this vessel under circumstances that are none of your concern," Picard said. "He is not a specimen. He is not a strategic asset. He is not subject to examination by any party without his informed consent, which I can tell you with confidence he has not given. The answer is no, Sub-Commander, and I would encourage you to consider what you'd like to do with that answer carefully, given that you are in Federation space." Silence on the channel. Gohan had moved, quietly without drawing attention. He had crossed from the turbo lift to stand slightly behind and to Picard's left. Not hiding behind him, not seeking protection, but positioning himself the way someone positions themselves when they're standing with someone rather than behind them. The distinction was meaningful. Troy noted it. Velas's eyes moved from Picard to Gohan. Something passed through her expression. Not surprise, she was too controlled for surprise, but recalibration. The boy was smaller than her sensors had perhaps suggested. Younger. She was, Troy sensed, reassessing her tactical assumptions. "The child speaks?" Velas asked. "I do," Gohan said. Another recalibration. His Federation standard was translator-mediated but clear, and his voice carried the particular quality of someone who was not afraid of her. "You are far from your home," Velas said, shifting her attention entirely to him with the smoothness of someone used to finding the most useful conversational target. "You must have questions. We have resources, scientists, researchers, the finest analytical minds in the quadrant. We could help you understand what happened to you. How to return, perhaps." It was elegant. Picard had to give her that. The offer was calibrated perfectly to what an 11-year-old, lost in grieving, might most want to hear. "We can help you get home." Gohan looked at her for a long moment. "My father was a warrior," he said finally. "He taught me to sense people's intentions." He paused. "He also taught me to be polite even when someone is lying to me." Velas was still. "Thank you for the offer, Shom," Gohan said. "No." Something moved in Velas's expression that Troy's empathic sense interpreted as genuine. Was it brief surprise? She had not expected that from the boy. She recovered with professional speed and returned her attention to Picard. "I trust you appreciate the delicacy of this situation, Captain," she said. "The Star Empire will be monitoring this sector. Whatever this child represents, whatever power he carries, it is not something the Federation should possess alone. That is not a threat. It is a statement of reality." "I understand your position," Picard said. "My response remains unchanged." The channel closed. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then Riker exhaled. "They'll contact the Praetor within the hour." "Yes," Picard agreed. And if High Command decides they want him badly enough, then we'll deal with that when it happens, number one. Picard turned. Mr. Data, I want continuous sensor sweeps. If that warbird cloaks, and I want to know the instant it moves. Understood, Captain. Picard looked at Gohan. The boy was still watching the space where the Romulan commander's face had been, his expression thoughtful. Processing. There was a particular quality to his stillness. Not passivity, but the focused quietude of someone organizing information into useful shapes. She wasn't going to help me, Gohan said. Not a question. No, Picard said. She wasn't. Gohan nodded. My dad would have seen through her too, he said. He was terrible at hiding his own feelings, but he always knew when someone else was hiding theirs. A pause. He said pure-hearted people can sense impurity. He said it lightly, a memory rather than a wound, and then seemed surprised at himself for saying it, as if he'd expected it to cost more than it did. As if talking about his father with these strangers in this impossible place had produced something that felt unexpectedly like relief. Troy said nothing. Some moments were not improved by commentary. Captain, Worf said from tactical, his voice carrying the specific gravity of someone reporting something they don't like. The warbird has cloaked. Picard straightened. Track it. Attempting to. They are moving. A pause. Captain, they are not retreating. They are taking up a flanking position. Riker looked at Picard. They're not leaving. No, Picard said. They're waiting. He clasped his hands behind his back and regarded the starfield. The Romulan warbird invisible within it, patient as everything dangerous is patient. The question is what they're waiting for. Sleep aboard a starship had a particular quality. And the hum of the warp engines at low cruise, a frequency so constant it became subliminal within days, created a kind of white noise that experienced crew members described as the most reliable sleep aid in the quadrant. The Enterprise at night, running on skeleton shifts, was a different vessel than its daylight self. Quieter, dimmer, the corridors emptied to a skeleton crew, the massive hull moving through the dark between stars with the unhurried patience of something that had been doing this for a long time. Gohan couldn't sleep. He had been given quarters on Deck 8, a guest cabin that Counselor Troy had arranged with practical thoughtfulness, replicated food stocked in quantities that reflected what she'd observed of his appetite, the lighting adjustable. The temperature, set to approximate what the translator's cultural database suggested, was comfortable for his species. It was the most comfortable place he had been in longer than he could immediately calculate, which was its own kind of uncomfortable. Comfort, when grief was fresh, felt like betrayal. Like you were moving on when you hadn't yet earned the right. He sat on the floor instead of the bed, legs crossed, eyes closed, not sleeping, training, specifically the breathing exercises his father had taught him before he could read, the foundational cultivation that Goku had learned from his own master and passed to his son with the cheerful certainty that everything important could be taught through patient repetition. Feel where your energy is, Gohan. Now feel where it wants to go. Now find the space between wanting and going. And that space is yours. The space between wanting and going. He sat in it and tried to feel his Kai, and what he felt instead was the subspace variance that LaForge had explained to him at dinner. The Enterprise's warp field, an invisible architecture of bent space-time that permeated the entire vessel, interfering with his energy cultivation the way static interferes with a signal. Not blocking it, distorting it, like trying to hear his father's voice through bad weather. He opened his eyes. Deck 8 was quiet. Through the viewport, stars moved in the slow drift of impulse travel. The Romulan warbird was out there somewhere, cloaked, waiting, and Gohan's Ki sense, diminished as it was through the subspace interference, could still feel the shape of it. A concentration of intent, disciplined and cold. Sitting in the dark at a distance that was close enough to be a statement, he decided to walk. The corridors at this hour were not empty. He passed two ensigns on their way to Gamma Shift, who stared at him with the barely suppressed fascination of people who had heard things from colleagues and were now encountering the source. He passed a Vulcan science officer who gave him a measured nod that Gohan instinctively returned with a small bow, a reflex from a world where formal acknowledgement was currency. He passed 10 forward, which was lit warmly and occupied by a scattered population of crew members in various states of off-duty contemplation. He stopped, looked through the viewport wall at the stars, then went in. Guinan was behind the bar. She was a tall woman with an extraordinary hat and eyes that had seen, Gohan would later learn, he considerably more of the universe than most people's eyes had seen. She was mixing something for a lieutenant at the far end of the bar, and she looked up when Gohan came in, and her expression did the thing that almost no one else's expression on the ship had done. It didn't recalibrate. It didn't reassess. It simply acknowledged him with the comfortable certainty of someone who had been expecting the general shape of this encounter, even if not its specifics. "You should be asleep," she said. "I can't," Gohan said. "I know." She set down the glass she was polishing. "Sit." He sat at the bar. She put something in front of him. Not a drink, a bowl. Warm. He looked at it. "It's not from your world," she said, "but it's close enough. My best guess based on what I was told you ate today." She tilted her head. "Try it." He tried it, and it was sweet and warm and tasted nothing like anything from Earth, and also, inexplicably, made him think of Chi-Chi's kitchen on a cold morning, and he ate 3 more bowls of it before he thought to say thank you. "You're welcome," Guinan said, as if he'd said it. Maybe he had. "The warp field is bothering you?" He looked at her. "How do you know that?" She smiled at him in the way people smile when the answer is long. "I know a lot of things," she said. "Not all of them in ways I can explain." She leaned on the bar. "Your energy, what you call Kai, it's not like anything that exists in this universe naturally. It's not subspace energy. It's not neural energy. It's not antimatter or dark matter or any of the things our science has names for. It's something from your universe that doesn't have a native category here." Gohan stared at her. "Can you understand it?" "I understand that it exists and that this universe doesn't know what to do with it yet." She paused. "Give it time. Things find their footing." She looked at him with eyes that were doing something he associated with his mother. Not analyzing, not assessing, simply seeing. "You're worried you're getting weaker." He was quiet for a moment. "My Kai sense is, the warp field makes it hard to feel clearly, and my energy levels are lower than they should be. After the cell games, even after everything, I should have recovered by now. But the interference—" "You're not getting weaker," Guinan said. "You're getting quieter. There's a difference." He looked at her. "The loudest version of yourself showed up here still bleeding from the hardest moment of your life," she said. "Hui, this universe doesn't match your frequencies yet. That's not weakness. That's friction. And friction—" She picked up her cloth and resumed polishing. "Friction means contact. You're not losing your power, Gohan. You're learning the shape of a new place." He sat with that for a moment. Through the floor-to-ceiling viewport of 10 forward, the stars moved. The Romulan warbird lurked invisible in them. "There's something out there," he said. "The ship that came before, I can feel it." "The Romulans," Guinan said. "They're patient," he said. "Whatever they're waiting for, they're very comfortable waiting for it." "Romulans usually are." She set the glass down. "They think patience is the same as winning." "It's not?" She looked at him steadily. "Patience is a tool. What you do with the waiting is what matters." She picked up another glass. "Can your father, from what the computer tells me, from what Counselor Troy has shared, he was patient in a different way. He trusted, in you especially." Gohan looked at his hands. The wristbands caught the low light of 10 forward. They had belonged to his training regimen, waited for resistance. Worn so long they felt like part of his skeleton. "He shouldn't have had to," Gohan said quietly. "Trust me that much. He shouldn't have died. I could have ended it faster. Before, I let it go on too long. I wanted Cell to suffer." His voice was steady but just barely. "That's why he died, because I lost control of wanting." Guinan was quiet. "If I had just finished it—" "Stop," she said. Not harshly, precisely. "You're doing the thing where you make yourself the cause of an outcome you didn't choose. You were a child facing something no child should face. You did something that needed doing. And your father—" She looked at him with those deep, undecorated eyes. "Your father made a choice. his own choice. That's not yours to carry as a failure. The stars moved. Somewhere in them, unseen, the warbird waited. And then every light on deck 8 flickered. A sound, low, resonant, felt more than heard, moved through the hull. Gohan was on his feet before Gunan registered the vibration. "What was that?" she said. Gohan's key sense, muffled as it was, had caught something. Something that was not Romulan, not Federation, not any shape of intent he'd felt before. It was vast, and it was interested. His comm badge, Troy had arranged one for him that afternoon, chimed. Worf's voice, "All senior staff to the bridge. We have a new contact. Unknown configuration. It is not the Romulan vessel." Gohan looked at Gunan. "Go," she said. He went. The object on the view screen was not a ship in any configuration Starfleet had catalogued. It was a cube, 3 kilometers on each side, its surface a dense lattice of conduits, nodes, and projections that suggested not construction, but accumulation. As if it had been built by a process of addition rather than design, each component grafted onto the last in service of a logic that was not aesthetic, but functional. Relentlessly, completely functional. It moved without the elegance of warp travel, without the fluid grace of Romulan engineering. It simply advanced, displacing space with the calm indifference of something that had never needed to be fast, because nothing it had ever pursued had successfully run. It was enormous. Aaron, it was patient. It was broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. "We are the Borg," the voice said, emerging from every speaker on the bridge at once, layered and harmonic in the way that suggested not one speaker, but thousands. "Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile." Picard stood at the center of the bridge and did not move. Those who knew him well, Riker, Troy, Data, Crusher, who had run from sickbay and was standing at the back of the bridge because she could not be anywhere else, watched him with the particular attention of people who understood what this cost him. Picard had been locutus. The Borg had taken him and worn him like a suit and used his voice and his knowledge and his face to kill 11,000 people at Wolf 359. He carried that the way Gohan carried the cell games. Not visibly, not performatively, but in the specific way that certain experiences rewrite a person's operating architecture permanently. He stood still for 3 seconds. Then, "Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Mr. Worf, load quantum torpedoes." "Aye, Captain." Gohan was standing at the back of the bridge. He had arrived from 10 forward at a run, not a human run, which Worf had discovered when the boy had covered the distance from the turbo lift to his current position, in a time that the ship's internal sensors logged and then flagged for review. He had taken in the view screen in one look, and his expression had shifted into the combat-ready stillness that was becoming, to the crew, as recognizable as his grief. "What is that?" he asked. "The Borg Collective," Data said from Ops, his fingers moving continuously. "A cybernetic hive mind organism that assimilates other species and technologies to achieve what it defines as perfection. They are responsible for the destruction of numerous civilizations and the deaths of tens of thousands of Federation citizens." He paused. "They are, by most measures, the most dangerous entity the Federation has encountered." Gohan looked at the cube. "How do they fight?" "They adapt," Data said. "Weapons that are effective on a first strike become ineffective within a small number of subsequent strikes. They learn and modify their defenses in real time. Additionally, individual Borg drones can withstand significant physical trauma without incapacitation. But they can be hurt?" "Initially, yes." Gohan looked at the cube for another moment, then at Picard. "Why are they here?" "Oh, they want the ship?" "They want everything the ship contains," Picard said, "including you." This landed visibly. Gohan's eyes moved back to the cube, and something went through his expression. Not fear. The crew was learning not to expect fear from him, but a kind of reckoning. An ethical inventory, conducted rapidly. "Captain," Worf reported, "the Borg cube is scanning us. Specifically," he looked at his console. "The scans are concentrated on Deck 8, on the guest quarters." "They found his energy signature," Riker said. During his demonstration in the holodeck, Data said, Gohan's key output at Super Saiyan level produced a measurable subspace variance detectable at considerable range. The Borg, whose sensor arrays are significantly more sophisticated than our own, would have logged this signature. They came for me, Gohan said. Not guilty, not afraid. Factual. We don't know, Riker started. They came for me, Gohan said again, with the patience of someone who had already finished the argument. My energy is something they haven't seen before. They want to understand it by taking it. He looked at Picard. That's what assimilation means. Taking. Yes, Picard said. Gohan nodded once. Something in him settled, the particular settling of a decision made cleanly, without ambivalence. Mr. Data, Picard said, turning to Ops. What is our tactical assessment? Can we engage the cube effectively? Our quantum torpedoes will be effective for the first 2 to 3 volleys, Data said. After that, the collective will adapt their shielding to our weapon frequencies. Phasers follow a similar adaptation curve. At full engagement, I estimate we can inflict meaningful damage for approximately 8 to 12 minutes before our weapons lose effectiveness. He paused. The cube's armament would overwhelm our shields in approximately the same time frame under sustained fire. So we trade, Riker said. We trade, Data confirmed, and then we lose. The bridge was quiet except for the overlapping status reports from stations running at red alert. The Borg cube continued its advance. Unhurried, inevitable, absolutely confident in arithmetic. Worf broke the silence. Captain, the Romulan warbird has decloaked. The view screen split to show both contacts. The Devortex had repositioned, not between the Enterprise and the cube, not in any geometry that suggested protection. It had taken up a flanking position relative to the Enterprise, equidistant from both vessels. Watching. When they're not helping, Riker said. They're not attacking either, Troy said. They're observing, waiting to see what happens. She paused. What Gohan does. The Tal Shiar, Picard said quietly, understanding landing. They want a demonstration. Let the Borg do the threatening. Watch how the asset responds. Gohan had been listening to all of this with his eyes on the cube. Now he turned to face Picard, and his expression was very clear and very direct in the way that 11-year-olds who have not yet learned the diplomatic uses of ambiguity tend to be. I can go out there, he said. No, Picard said immediately. Captain, you are not a weapon, Picard said, with a precision that left no room for argument. You are not a strategic asset. You are not a response to a tactical problem. You are a person who is on this ship under my protection, and I will not deploy you against a threat that arrived, in part because of your presence here. That is not something I'm willing to do. Gohan stared at him. My father, he said carefully, used to say something like that fighting to protect someone is different from using someone to fight. He paused. But he also said that the strongest person in the room has a responsibility that the others don't, because they can afford the cost. What cost? Picard asked. Standing in front, Gohan said simply. The cube fired. Not at the Enterprise. A warning, a ranging shot, a bolt of cutting energy that crossed the bow close enough that the view screen compensated for the light. The message was not subtle. We are done with preamble. Worf returned fire. 3 quantum torpedoes. A perfect spread, impacting the cube's forward face with detonations that bloomed gold and white against its dark lattice. The shields held, damaged notably, and the cube absorbed the impacts and continued advancing. Shields at 73%, Worf reported. Cube shields regenerating. Estimate weapons adaptation in 4 minutes. Fire phasers, full spread, Riker ordered. Picard looked at Gohan during the exchange, at the boy watching the battle with contained, coiled readiness, hands loose at his sides, weight centered. He was not panicking. He was not performing courage. He was simply present, as someone is present when they have decided they are willing to do something and are waiting to see if they need to. Mr. Data, Picard said quietly, is there any record of the Borg attempting to assimilate a being with a fundamentally foreign energy signature? Something incompatible with their nanoprobe technology? Data processed. There are theoretical models suggesting that nanoprobe assimilation requires a compatible bioelectric framework. A sufficiently alien energy signature could, theoretically, prove incompatible with standard nanoprobe function. He paused. However, the collective would adapt. The question is the time frame. Picard looked at the cube, looked at Gohan. If they attempt to assimilate you, he said carefully, and you were to resist, actively, physically resist, what would happen to the drones? Gohan thought about this with the focused honesty of someone who has never had the luxury of underestimating his own impact. At Super Saiyan level, he said, a drone that touched me would, the energy output from my body alone would probably, he paused, it would hurt them. I don't know how badly, but you would not be harmed. No, certain, not arrogant, just accurate. Picard was quiet for 3 seconds. I am not deploying you, he said, but I am asking you a question. If the Borg attempt to board this vessel, if they send drones to this bridge, to these people, what would you choose to do? Gohan looked at Troy, who had been kind to him, at Data, who had seen him, at Worf, who had said nothing but had positioned himself slightly in front of Gohan for the last 10 minutes without appearing to notice he was doing it. Protect them, Gohan said, without hesitation. Then, Picard said, are turning back to the view screen with the expression of a man who has navigated the exact distance between principle and pragmatism. We fight until we can't, and we trust that what comes next will be what it will be. The cube fired again, this time at the Enterprise. The first drone materialized on Deck 12, then 4 more on Deck 7, then 11 simultaneously across Decks 4, 5, and 9. The Borg didn't announce boarding parties the way Klingons announce battle. No war cry, no declaration, no theater of it. They simply appeared, drawn by transporter technology that didn't require lowered shields because they had spent the last 8 minutes adapting to the Enterprise's shield frequencies with the patient inevitability of water finding gaps in stone. Intruder alert, the computer announced, with the calm of a system that reported catastrophe and routine in identical tones. Borg drones detected on decks 4, 5, 7, 9, and 12. Security teams responding. On the bridge, Worf was already moving. I will lead the response personally. Mr. Worf, Picard's voice stopped him at the turbolift. Coordinate from tactical. I need you here. Worf returned to his station with the expression of a man swallowing something sharp. His fingers moved across tactical with controlled ferocity. Security teams are engaging on Deck 7. Initial phaser fire is effective. A pause. Drones are adapting. Second volley has reduced effectiveness. How long before phasers are useless? Riker asked. On Deck 7, approximately 90 seconds. Riker looked at the view screen, where the cube continued its slow advance. And then at the internal sensor display showing the spreading constellation of red intruder markers across the ship's decks. The mathematics of the situation were not friendly. Security teams with adapting resistant weapons spread across multiple decks against drones that didn't feel pain and didn't stop and were connected to a hive intelligence that was learning the ship's defensive responses in real time. Gohan was watching the internal sensor display. He had moved to stand beside Data at Ops, uninvited but not unwelcome. Data had shifted slightly to give him viewing angle, a small accommodation that the android had made without conscious deliberation. Gohan was reading the sensor display with the tactical focus of someone who had spent his childhood learning to track multiple opponents simultaneously, mapping the drone positions against the ship's layout with a spatial intelligence that was, in its own way, as formidable as his Kai. They're moving toward the center of the ship, Gohan said. Confirmed, Data said. The drones are converging along a path consistent with movement toward, he processed, toward the bridge, and toward Deck 8. He looked at Gohan. Your quarters. They know I'm not there anymore, Gohan said. They're tracking the energy signature, following it here. Also confirmed, Data said, the collective's internal communications, which we can partially intercept, contain repeated reference to a designation they have assigned you. The translation is approximate, but it renders as something equivalent to the unclassified energy. They have never encountered Kai before, and they do not have a category for it. He paused. This is, for the Borg, an extremely unusual situation. They don't like things they can't classify, Gohan said. They find them, Data said. Compelling. A turbo lift opened and Dr. Crusher stepped onto the bridge, having apparently decided that sickbay was where she was needed least right now, and the bridge was where she was needed most. She took one look at the sensor display and came to stand beside Riker. Deck 7 team has fallen back, Worf reported. Phaser fire is now completely ineffective against the drones in that section. 3 crew members have been grabbed. Nanoprobe injection confirmed in one case. His voice did not waver. Ensign Taro, she is alive. Assimilation is not complete. Medical team is attempting intervention. Crusher was already moving back toward the turbo lift. Beverly, Picard's voice. She stopped, turned. The look between them was the compressed communication of people who have known each other long enough to have whole arguments in a glance. He was not telling her she couldn't go. He was asking her to wait 30 seconds while he decided whether the situation she was about to run into was survivable. Deck 7 is about to become very unsafe, Gohan said quietly. Everyone looked at him. He was still watching the sensor display. The drone markers on Deck 7 had stopped moving, not retreating, not advancing, holding position in the corridor outside the fallen back security team's last location. They stopped, Riker said. Why did they stop? They know I'm aware of them, Gohan said. Sorry, they're waiting to see what I do. He looked at Picard. The hive mind, they're all connected. The ones on Deck 7 know what the ones up here know. And what they know right now is that I've been watching the sensors. He paused. They're curious about me, more curious than they are about the ship. You're suggesting, Picard said carefully, that the collective has partially redirected its focus from assimilation of the Enterprise to study of you. I'm suggesting they've slowed down, Gohan said, because they want to see what I am before they try to take it. He met Picard's eyes, which means if I give them something to look at, it might buy time for your crew. The bridge was very quiet. What are you proposing? Riker asked. Let me go to Deck 7. Absolutely not, Crusher said. They can't assimilate me, Gohan said. Mister, Hush Data said the nanoprobes need a compatible bioelectric framework. My Kai, my energy. It's not from this universe. It doesn't have a compatible framework. He said it without bravado, just the flat practicality of someone reporting a tactical reality. If a drone grabs me, the Ki output from my body alone will reject the nanoprobes. I won't be assimilated, but the drone will be harmed, Data said. Yes. And the collective will learn from that interaction and adapt, Data said. Yes, Gohan said again, but it will take time. And while they're figuring out how to adapt to something they've never encountered before, your crew has time to get Ensign Taro to sickbay and fall back to defensible positions. Picard looked at him for a long moment. DeWatt, this boy, this 11-year-old who had traveled across the boundary between universes and arrived bleeding and grieving and had spent 6 hours in this reality and was now proposing to walk down a corridor full of Borg drones in order to buy time for people he had known for less than a day. You understand, Picard said quietly, that I cannot order you to do this. I know, Gohan said. I'm not asking for an order. I'm asking for the turbolift. Worf made a sound that was not quite a word. In Klingon culture, there was a concept, battle, honor, that sometimes expressed itself not in speech, but in the involuntary physiological responses of a warrior recognizing something worthy. Worf was experiencing one of those responses and managing it poorly. I'll go with him, Worf said. Worf, Picard started. And someone must coordinate security response on that deck, Worf said, in the tone of a man whose decision is not a decision, but a fact. I am the chief of security. It is my deck. He looked at Gohan. And I will not send a child into a corridor of Borg drones without someone to watch my back, Gohan said. He looked at Worf with those dark eyes that had seen the Cell games. Thank you. Worf straightened. Do not thank me yet. They moved to the turbo lift together. The Klingon in full uniform, hand on his phaser, and the boy in orange who stood barely chest high to him and radiated even through the subspace interference, enough energy to make the turbo lift's internal sensors cycle through error states. Deck 7, Worf said. The doors closed. Picard turned to the view screen. The cube was holding position, not retreating, not advancing, as if it too was waiting, as if the collective, That vast distributed intelligence, stretched across thousands of vessels and millions of drones, had collectively paused to direct a portion of its attention toward Deck 7 of the USS Enterprise. Data, Picard said. Internal sensors on Deck 7. Full display. Aye, Captain. The secondary screen populated with the corridor layout. 7 drone markers, stationary, 2 crew members, Worf's biosign, and a smaller one the computer had already logged as non-standard, logging it with the designation it had settled on after 6 hours of trying. Gohan, Sun, species, unclassified. The turbo lift opened on Deck 7. The corridor lights had been damaged. 3 drones stood in the dimness, their cybernetic implants clicking and whirring in the quiet. It's one of their single optical lenses tracking the new arrivals with the unhurried attention of things that did not need to hurry. Worf raised his phaser. Gohan put a hand on his arm. Wait, Gohan said. He stepped forward. Alone. Into the space between Worf and the drones, into the dim corridor, into the attention of the collective. And he let his Kai rise. Not Super Saiyan. Not yet. Just the baseline output of a child from another universe whose very existence was a category the Borg had never needed before tonight. The drones stopped. Every one of them. 7 drones on Deck 7, and from the sensor feeds Picard was watching, every drone that had boarded the Enterprise, all of them pausing simultaneously, their optical lenses orienting in the direction of the energy signature they had come here to understand. The collective in its millions, was paying attention. Gohan stood in the dim corridor and looked at the drone nearest to him and said something quiet. Too quiet for the internal sensors to pick up, too quiet for Worf to catch clearly. Later, when Worf reported the incident to Picard, he would describe it as, he spoke to them, as if they could hear him, as if it mattered that he tried. Then the nearest drone reached for him, and Gohan let it touch his arm. The effect was immediate and total. The drone's hand closed on Gohan's forearm, and the ki that had been simmering at baseline output spiked. Not deliberately, not as an attack, as a simple physiological response. The way a body produces heat when cold, the way lungs expand when submerged. The nanoprobes the drone injected met key energy, and the interaction was, for the nanoprobes, catastrophic. The drone released him. He stepped back. Its optical lens flickered, and somewhere in the vast distributed intelligence of the Borg collective, something encountered a concept it had no vocabulary for, and for the first time in recent memory, hesitated. The hesitation lasted 4 seconds. For the Borg collective, a consciousness that processed tactical data across thousands of vessels simultaneously, that had assimilated civilizations in the time it took a humanoid to finish a sentence, 4 seconds of hesitation was not a pause. It was an event. Something had happened in the networked intelligence of millions of drones that had no precedent in the collective's accumulated experience. And the 4 seconds it took to begin formulating a response were, by the Borg's own internal metrics, extraordinary. On Deck 7, Gohan watched the drone that had touched him, though it was still standing, still functional. Its optical lens had stopped flickering and was now fixed on him with an intensity that felt, even through the cold architecture of cybernetic detachment, like genuine attention. The nanoprobes it had injected had lasted approximately 0.3 seconds in contact with his Kai before being neutralized. Not destroyed by any chemical incompatibility, not rejected by an immune response, simply unmade by contact with an energy that the nanoprobe's programming had no instruction set for. They had encountered Ki and found no compatible interface and ceased. The other 6 drones had not moved. They're thinking, Gohan said. Worf stood 2 meters behind him, phaser raised, watching the drones with the focused readiness of a predator who has identified 7 threats and is prioritizing them by proximity. Borg do not think, he said. They process. Same thing, Gohan said, just faster. On the bridge, Picard watched the sensor display. The drone markers on Deck 7 remained stationary. The cube outside maintained its position. The Romulan warbird, decloaked since the Borg's arrival, had moved to a distance that suggested tactical assessment rather than engagement. Close enough to observe, far enough to survive if the situation escalated suddenly. Data, Picard said quietly. What is the collective doing? Analyzing, Data said. I am intercepting fragments of Borg communication traffic. The encryption is beyond our complete decryption capability, but the volume and pattern of internal communications has increased by a factor of approximately 40 since the drone made contact with Gohan. He paused. The collective is devoting significant processing capacity to the interaction. They are? He tilted his head. Captain, the closest analogy I can construct is that the collective is surprised. The Borg don't get surprised, Riker said. They do not have a cultural framework for surprise, Data said. That is not the same as being incapable of encountering something unexpected. He looked at the sensor display. They have encountered something for which their assimilation protocols have no template. Chi energy does not exist in this universe naturally. The collective has no prior data. They are, for the first time in a considerable period, gathering information rather than acting on it. How long does that buy us? Picard asked. Unknown, but I would suggest we use the time. Picard tapped his comm badge. Shucked Picard to LaForge. Geordi's voice came back strained with the specific tension of an engineer fighting a losing battle with a technical problem. Go ahead, Captain. We're a little busy down here. The cube's been running some kind of resonance scan through our hull that's playing absolute havoc with the EPS conduits. How are our transporters? A pause. Functional. Barely. The Borg have adapted to 3 of our 6 transporter frequencies, but the other 3 are still clear. For now. Can you beam Ensign Taro directly to sickbay? Already on it. She's en route. Another pause, longer. Captain, I've been looking at something. The interference pattern the cube is generating, the resonance scan, it's not just disrupting our systems, it's also interacting with Gohan's energy signature. Every time he pulses, every time his ki fluctuates, the cube's scan adjusts. They're trying to map him. Can you interfere with the mapping? Maybe. If I reconfigure the deflector to generate a counter resonance at the frequencies they're using for the scan, I might be able to introduce enough noise to make his energy signature harder to read. He paused again. It would also make it harder for us to read. We'd be flying partially blind to the Ki signature. Picard considered this for approximately 2 seconds. Do it. Aye, Captain. On Deck 7, the drones moved. Not toward Gohan. Not a tactical advance. They moved laterally, spreading along the corridor walls, with the organic geometry of a system reorganizing itself, creating space, creating angles. Worf's hand tightened on his phaser. They're repositioning, Worf said. Or they're testing something, Gohan said. His Ki sense was reading the drones with the same attention he'd once used to track cells' movements across an arena, mapping their intent through the shape of their positioning. They want to see if surrounding me changes what happens. Does it? No. Gohan watched the drones settle into their new positions, 7 of them, arranged in a rough circle at the corridor's natural choke point. But it tells me something about how they think. He glanced back at Worf. They're systematic. If one approach doesn't work, they try a variation. They're not going to stop trying. This is known, Worf said, with the flatness of someone for whom this knowledge was not academic. Right. Gohan turned back to the drones. I need to do something they can't vary around. Explain. Every time they try to assimilate me and fail, they learn something and adjust. So I need to show them something they can't adjust to. Something that isn't a variable. It's a constant. He was quiet for a moment, working it through. If I push enough Chi into the corridor, not targeted, not a blast, just an ambient field, the nanoprobes in every drone in the vicinity will have the same problem the first one had. Contact with Chi they can't process. But at field level, they can't avoid contact. It's not a touch they can pull back from. It's the air. Worf looked at him. The power required for that, in your current state, it'll take something, Gohan said. He said it honestly, without drama. But less than Super Saiyan 2, I think. He paused. Probably. Probably, Worf repeated. I've never done exactly this before. He looked at Worf. But my father always said that the best techniques are the ones you invent because the moment needs them. Worf was quiet for a moment, then, your father sounds like he was a warrior worth knowing. Gohan looked at the deck briefly. Yeah, he said. He was. The nearest drone took a step forward. Gohan closed his eyes. What he did next was not a technique he had been taught. It was not in Piccolo's training curriculum, or Goku's instruction, or anything that had been formally transmitted through the lineage of martial arts he'd inherited. It was something he constructed in the space of 3 seconds from first principles. From his understanding of Kai as a field phenomenon rather than a directed force, from the physics of ambient energy propagation that he had intuited rather than studied, from the simple fact that his body, in this universe, was already leaking Kai into the environment constantly just by existing. He stopped containing it, not transforming, not pushing into Super Saiyan, simply releasing the active suppression he'd been maintaining since he arrived. The careful damping down of his energy output that he'd been performing unconsciously, the polite dimming of himself that he'd been doing because he was a guest on someone else's ship and he didn't want to break anything. He stopped being careful. The key field expanded outward from him in a sphere. Not golden, not the Super Saiyan flare, but something quieter and more pervasive, like heat radiating from a surface that has absorbed a great deal of sunlight. It filled the corridor in both directions. It passed through walls. On the deck above, in the deck below, officers felt something they would later struggle to describe. A warmth, a pressure, a sense of standing next to something immense that was also, unmistakably, alive. The drones stopped. Every drone on Deck 7 stopped simultaneously, and through the collective's communications network, every drone that had boarded the Enterprise stopped with them. Their nanoprobe systems, calibrated for biological assimilation of organisms from this universe, encountered ambient Kai energy and found the same incompatibility the first drone had found. But now it was everywhere. There was no direction without it. There was no approach that avoided contact. The collective had encountered an environment it could not assimilate. On the bridge, every sensor reading tied to Gohan's energy signature spiked simultaneously. LaForge's counter-resonance deflector configuration activated a moment too late to obscure the pulse. The cube outside registered it and responded, not with weapons, but with a sudden, intense concentration of its own scanning systems, boring down on Deck 7 with the focused attention of a mind encountering a concept it cannot categorize and refusing to stop until it can. "Captain," Data said, and his voice carried something that was not quite urgency but was adjacent to it. "The collective is increasing power to its sensor arrays. They are attempting a deep-level bioscan of Gohan at intensities that—" He paused. "At these intensities, the scan itself may cause physiological harm." Picard was already at the communications panel. "Picard to Gohan." On Deck 7, Gohan's comm badge chimed. He opened his eyes. The Ki field was holding. He could feel its boundaries, feel the drones stalled within it, feel the strange texture of their cybernetic consciousness pressing against the field's edge like something trying a locked door. "I hear you," he said. "The cube is attempting a deep bioscan at harmful intensities," Picard said. "You need to—" "I know," Gohan said. He could feel it. Not pain yet, but the precursor to pain. A pressure building in his cells that had the quality of something being read too hard, interrogated at a level below language. "I'm going to have to go Super Saiyan." A pause on the channel. "What does that mean for the ship?" Gohan thought about this for exactly as long as it took him to remember the holodeck wall. "Was tell everyone to hold on to something," he said. Then he transformed. The key field that had been ambient and pervasive became, in the instant of transformation, structured and concentrated. The Super Saiyan flare erupting outward from him in a column of golden light that shattered the corridor lighting, blew the panels off 2 EPS conduits, and propagated through the hull of the Enterprise in a shockwave that every crew member felt as a single, overwhelming pulse of not electricity, not heat, not radiation. Something that had no category in Federation medicine. Something that was experienced differently by every person it touched and described afterward with words like clarity and weight and, from 3 separate crew members who had never met, the identical phrase like standing in sunlight after a very long time indoors. In the Borg deep scan collapsed. Every drone on the ship powered down simultaneously. Not destroyed, not disassembled, simply overwhelmed. Their cybernetic systems flooded with Ki energy that their nanoprobes could not process, and their hive mind connection could not filter. They stood in their positions across the Enterprise's decks like statues, optical lenses dark, and in the collective's vast networked consciousness, 700 million drones registered something that had no designation in their accumulated knowledge and filed it provisionally under a category that had not previously existed, unassimilable. On deck 7, Worf stood in the golden light with his phaser at his side and looked at the boy, this small, extraordinary grieving child from another universe, standing in Super Saiyan 2's corona with tears on his face that he probably didn't know were there, and felt something move through him that his culture would have called batlo, but that was, in this moment, simply awe. "Gohan," he said quietly, "the drones are down." Gohan let the transformation settle. The golden light faded slowly, like a sunset running backward. He exhaled. "Good," he said. His voice was steady. Then from outside the hull, the cube began to move, not retreating, accelerating. The cube was not retreating because the Borg did not retreat. This was not stubbornness in the way a person could be stubborn, not ego, not pride, not the refusal to accept defeat that characterized humanoid psychology at its most entrenched. The collective had no ego to protect. It had encountered an organism it could not assimilate. It logged the encounter, filed it under a category it had created 60 seconds ago, and immediately begun developing a response. The response was not tactical withdrawal. The response was escalation, because the collective's fundamental operating logic had only two states in relation to an obstacle: assimilate or increase force until assimilation becomes possible. The cube accelerated toward the Enterprise at full impulse. "Collision course," Data reported, his voice precisely calibrated to convey urgency without panic, a tone he had developed over years of serving on a ship that seemed magnetically attracted to catastrophic situations. "Impact in 4 minutes, 20 seconds at current velocity. They are not charging weapons." "They don't need weapons if they're going to ram us," Riker said. "They are not going to ram us," Picard said, and with a certainty that came not from sensor data, but from 11 years of encounters with the Borg, from the specific nightmare knowledge of Locatus, from understanding the collective's logic at a level that cost him more than he discussed. "They are going to match velocity and reinitiate boarding. They want Gohan. They are not going to destroy what they're trying to collect." "Then they'll board in force," Riker said. "More drones. Adapted for Ki exposure." 4 minutes, Data said. "Captain, I must note that even if the collective's adaptation to Ki is incomplete, the number of drones a cube of this class can deploy simultaneously is—" "I know, Mr. Data." On the secondary screen, Gohan's bio sign was moving from Deck 7 toward the turbolift. Beside it, Worf's, both returning to the bridge. Picard watched the two markers and thought about a conversation he'd had years ago with a Vulcan ambassador who had told him that the fundamental error humanoids made in crisis was confusing the situation they wished they were in with the situation they were actually in. The situation they were actually in. One Borg cube, 4 minutes from boarding range, adapted to, or adapting to, the one asset aboard the Enterprise that had successfully disrupted their assimilation protocols. The Romulan warbird at observation distance, waiting with patient predatory intelligence for an outcome it could exploit. A crew of over 1,000 people whose safety was his absolute responsibility. And one 11-year-old boy from another universe who had already spent more of himself in the last hour than anyone had the right to ask. The turbo lift opened. Gohan and Worf stepped onto the bridge. Gohan looked at the view screen, the cube enormous and accelerating, 3 kilometers of accumulated conquest bearing down on them. And then at the sensor display, and then at Picard, and in his eyes was the particular expression of someone who has done the mathematics and arrived at an answer they don't entirely like. "They adapted," he said. It wasn't a question. "They are adapting," Data said. "The drones you incapacitated are beginning to show restored function. The process is slow. The Ki exposure was unprecedented, and their recovery protocols are working from incomplete models. But they will be fully operational within 8 to 12 minutes. "And new drones coming through," Gohan said. "Yes, adapted to the degree their 12-minute data set allows for Ki exposure." Gohan nodded. "Processing." His eyes moved to Worf, then to Riker, then settled on Picard with the directness that Picard had come to understand was simply how the boy communicated. No social cushioning, no diplomatic softening, just the clear intention of someone who had been raised in a world where clarity was survival. "I need to go outside," Gohan said. The bridge was quiet. "Outside," Riker said. "The ship." Gohan looked at the view screen. "Out there, between the Enterprise and the cube." He said it the way you say something you've already fully decided, to people who need the explanation rather than the conclusion. "If I'm on the ship when the new drones board, they come through every deck. Your crew is in the corridors. Your crew gets hurt." He paused. "If I'm between the ship and the cube, I'm the target. And everything they send comes toward me instead of through here." "You cannot survive in open space," Worf said. "I can hold my breath for a long time," Gohan said, "and Kai generates a field. It's not the same as a spacesuit, but I've trained in worse conditions." "You've trained in a vacuum?" Riker said. "No," Gohan admitted, "but I've trained with people who were actively trying to kill me since I was 4, so I'm willing to try the vacuum." Troy made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and was very carefully contained before it became either. "Gohan," Picard said. His voice carried the weight of a man choosing his words with the deliberateness of someone who knows that words, in this moment, are the only available tool, and must therefore be used with absolute precision. "Chiri, what you're describing is a sacrifice play." "No," Gohan said immediately. "My dad did a sacrifice play. I watched it happen. I know what it looks like." His jaw was set. "This is different. This is a fight. I'm going out there to fight them. I need enough room to do it without breaking your ship." He looked at Picard steadily. "I'm not giving myself up. I'm asking for space to work." Picard held his gaze for a long moment. "Data," he said without looking away from Gohan. "If we lower shields for 15 seconds on the port ventral section, can we do so without exposing the crew to the cube's weapons?" At current range, the cube's energy weapons would require approximately 22 seconds to achieve lock and fire on an unshielded section, Data said. "Sonny, a 15-second window would be theoretically sufficient." "Transporter?" "LaForge reports 3 frequencies remain uncompromised. We can beam directly to external coordinates." Picard looked at Gohan. "You have a 15-second transport window. Once you're outside, we cannot get you back until the cube either withdraws or is disabled." "I know," Gohan said. "If something goes wrong, then I'll figure it out." He said it with absolute conviction and the ghost of something that might, in different circumstances, have been a smile. "My dad always said I do my best thinking when there's no other option." Worf crossed the bridge in 4 strides and stopped directly in front of Gohan. He looked down at the boy, this child who had fallen through a hole in the universe and was now about to step out of an airlock to fight a Borg cube, with an expression that had moved entirely beyond assessment and into something unguarded. "You fight with honor," Worf said, formally, the way he would say it to a warrior he respected. Gohan looked up at him. "Thank you, Worf." Worf stepped back. His jaw was tight. He returned to tactical and did not look at anyone. 3 minutes to boarding range," Data reported. "Mr. LaForge," Picard said, tapping his comm badge. "Prepare transporter pad 2 for external coordinates. Target, open space, 50 meters port ventral. Stand by to lower shields on my mark." "Ready, Captain," Geordi said. His voice was steady in the way that voices get steady when someone has decided that their feelings about a situation are a problem they'll solve later. Gohan turned toward the turbolift, then stopped, turned back. He looked at Troy, who was watching him with her hands clasped in her lap, and her empathic sense so overwhelmed with the combined emotional output of the bridge that she had retreated to a kind of deliberate stillness, the professional calm of someone who feels everything and has learned to hold it without drowning. She met his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for earlier, in sickbay." She nodded, couldn't speak, didn't try. He looked at Data. "You were the first person on this ship who talked to me like I was just a person, not a reading." Data processed this. "You're a person," he said. To the readings are merely insufficient to describe you." Gohan almost smiled. Then he looked at Picard. "My dad trusted me," he said, "with the most important thing he ever did." He paused. "I'm going to try to deserve that. Again." He straightened. I'll be okay. Picard held his gaze for one more second. Then he nodded once with the full weight of a captain's acknowledgement. Not permission, not command, but recognition. Of a choice made freely by someone old enough, in every way that mattered, to make it. Mark, Picard said. The shields dropped. LaForge energized. Gohan dissolved into the transporter's shimmer and was gone. The shields came back up in 14 seconds. On the view screen, 50 meters off the port ventral hull, a small figure appeared in the space between the Enterprise and the advancing cube. In the vacuum of space, and without atmosphere to carry it, his ki field manifested visually. A corona of golden light surrounding him, steady and contained, a small sun holding its position with absolute willful certainty. The cube slowed. They see him, Riker said quietly. They see him, Picard confirmed. The collective's focus, all of it, every scanning array on the cube, every processing thread devoted to the Enterprise engagement, shifted to the figure in the golden light. Gohan looked at the cube. 3 kilometers of accumulated conquest. Millions of voices in a single mind. The most dangerous thing the Federation had ever encountered. And before it, one boy, 11 years old from another universe, carrying grief like ballast and power like inheritance, suspended in the vacuum between stars with nothing but the light he made himself to keep him warm. He pulled the grief up, not to wallow in it, not to fall apart. He pulled it up deliberately, the way you bring fuel to a fire, because Piccolo had taught him that emotion without direction is chaos, but emotion with direction is force. And he was his father's son, and his father had faced the worst thing imaginable at the end of everything, and transformed it into the act of trust that sent that power forward into the next generation. Gohan let himself feel it. The cell games. His father's voice through the telepathic link. I believe in you, Gohan. You can do this. You're the one. And he transformed. Not Super Saiyan. Not Super Saiyan 2. Something the Enterprise's sensors had not previously recorded. To something that made every console on the bridge cycle through error, States and LaForge drop his hyperspanner in engineering, and the Romulan Warbird sensor chief turn from his console and say something in Romulan that translated approximately as, "That is not possible." The golden light around Gohan became something else. Not brighter, beyond bright, beyond any category of luminescence the sensors had language for. The Chi field expanded outward in a sphere that was measurable in kilometers. The cube stopped. Completely. Every system, every drone. As if the collective had, for the first time in its existence, encountered a stimulus it had no instructions set for and had defaulted to the only available response. Wait. And into the waiting, Gohan moved forward. He did not fire immediately. This was the thing that the Enterprise's external sensors recorded, that Data would analyze for 6 weeks afterward, that Picard would return to in his personal log repeatedly in the months that followed. Gohan moved toward the cube and did not immediately attack it. He stopped at a distance of approximately 200 meters from its forward face, close enough that every scanning array the collective possessed was focused on him with total, undivided attention, close enough that the scale of it was impossible. 3 kilometers of accumulated civilization pressing down on a single figure who measured perhaps 1.4 meters from heel to the crown of his luminous hair. And he waited. The collective waited with him. Later, Data would theorize that what happened in those 11 seconds was the most significant first contact event since Zephram Cochrane's warp flight attracted the Vulcans. The Borg collective, a consciousness that had never in its existence been in a position of uncertainty, was for 11 seconds uncertain. It had encountered an organism it could not assimilate. It had encountered an energy it could not categorize. It had deployed its full sensor capability and received data that refused to resolve into its existing taxonomy. And now that organism was floating in open space 200 meters away, radiating something that was not a weapon and not a surrender, and not any behavior the collective had a protocol for. It was, Data would write, an invitation, not to fight, to be understood. Gohan was not a diplomat, and he was 11 years old and he had learned everything he knew about conflict resolution from people whose primary tool was their fists. But he was also his father's son, And Goku had possessed something that defied the martial context he'd lived in his entire life. A genuine, unperformable openness to the other, a willingness to encounter even enemies as beings worthy of being known. It had gotten him killed, arguably. It had also, repeatedly, converted enemies into something else. Gohan held the key field open and steady, not aggressive, not passive, simply present, and he let the collective look. He let them see what key actually was, not as sensor data, not as an energy signature to be mapped and cataloged and assimilated. He let them see it the way you see something when you stop trying to categorize it and simply observe. Life energy, the fundamental force underlying every living thing in his universe, the connective tissue of a cosmos that was, at its deepest level, alive and interconnected and purposeful. He let them feel the grief in it, his father's death, the cell games, the weight of having been trusted with the most important moment of his world's history at an age when most children were worried about mathematics homework, because the grief was part of it. You couldn't show the power without the cost. You couldn't show the inheritance without the loss. The collective processed this for 11 seconds. Then every drone on the Enterprise powered back down, not incapacitated, shut down voluntarily. The boarding party on decks 4, 5, 7, 9, and 12, drones that had been recovering from Kai exposure, and drones that had been adapting to resume their assimilation protocols, simply stopped. Optical lenses dark, systems offline, waiting. The cube's weapons powered down. On the bridge, Worf stared at his tactical display. "Captain," he said, and his voice had the quality of a man reporting something he doesn't trust yet. "The cube has powered down all offensive systems. The drones are—" He looked again. "They are standing down." "Standing down," Riker repeated. "Confirmed," Data said. His fingers moved across ops with the rapid precision of someone trying to capture data before it changes. The collective's communications traffic has shifted entirely. They are no longer transmitting assimilation protocols. The pattern is— He paused. "Captain, the communication pattern is consistent with deliberation. With debate, ways of such a concept can be applied to the collective. They are processing something." "What Gohan showed them," Troy said quietly. She had felt it from the bridge. Not clearly, the vacuum of space and the hull between them, muting her empathic sense. But enough, the shape of what he'd done. He didn't attack them. He showed them something they'd never seen, something that didn't fit their model of the universe. "Kai," Picard said. "Life," Troy said. He showed them life. The kind that can't be assimilated because it isn't a technology or a biology. It's a choice. It's a relationship between a living being and the force that makes it live. She paused. The Borg have never encountered anything like that because nothing in this universe works that way. It doesn't exist here. Picard looked at the view screen, at the cube, massive and still, at the small golden figure 200 meters from its face, holding position with the patience of someone who has decided to trust the moment, even when the moment is a 3-kilometer Borg cube that has been trying to assimilate him for the past 40 minutes. "Open a channel to the cube," Picard said. Worf's eyebrows moved. "Captain." "Open it, Mr. Worf." A beat. "Channel open." Picard stepped forward, hands behind his back, the posture of absolute, unperformable calm. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise," he said. "I am speaking to you now because I believe you are listening in a way you were not, perhaps, an hour ago." He paused. "What you have encountered today is not a weapon. It is not a technology. It is not something that can be assimilated, well, because its fundamental nature is incompatible with the concept of assimilation. It belongs to a living being who chose to show it to you rather than use it against you." Another pause. "I am asking you to consider what that choice means, and I am asking you to leave." Silence on the channel. Then the Borg voice, layered, harmonic, thousands speaking in one, said something none of them had heard it say before. "We will consider." The channel closed. The cube began to move. Not toward the Enterprise. Away, slowly at first, then with increasing velocity, the massive vessel receding from the view screen, with the unhurried dignity of something that has made a decision and is implementing it without need for theater. They're leaving, Riker said, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. They are leaving, Data confirmed. The warp drive engaging. They are on a heading that takes them out of Federation space. He paused. Captain, I must note that in my records, I have no previous instance of a Borg cube leaving a combat engagement voluntarily in response to communication, Picard said. I was going to say a philosophical encounter, Data said. But yes, LaForge's voice came over the comm, strained and delighted in equal measure. Captain, are they actually leaving? My board says they're leaving. They are, Mr. LaForge. Because of Gohan. Because of Gohan, Picard said. Get him back on board. The transporter shimmer resolved on the bridge a minute later, and Gohan stepped off the pad and looked immediately at the view screen, at the diminishing shape of the cube, growing smaller with each second, retreating toward the edges of Federation space with its accumulated knowledge of an energy that existed in no other corner of this universe. He looked exhausted. The transformation had cost him. It was visible in the set of his shoulders, the slight unevenness of his breathing. The way he stood as if the gravity of the ship was slightly more than he wanted to negotiate with right now. But his eyes were clear. Whatever he had done out there, whatever he had shown them, he had done it intact. They're really leaving, he said. They are, Picard said. Gohan looked at the shrinking cube for another moment. I didn't think that would work, he said quietly. What did you think would happen? Riker asked. I thought I'd have to fight them. He watched the cube. But when I stopped trying to fight and just showed them, they stopped trying to assimilate. He frowned slightly. My dad would have known to do that from the beginning. He always tried to understand things before he fought them. You understood them in time, Picard said. That is what mattered. The Romulan warbird decloaked at that moment, not aggressively, not weapons hot, but deliberately visible, announcing itself the way you announce yourself when you've been watching something extraordinary and have decided that invisibility no longer serves. Subcommander Velas's face appeared on the view screen without the forced channel intrusion of before. This time she had hailed them properly. Captain Picard, she said. Her voice was, for the first time, something other than precisely controlled. There was something in it, not warmth. Romulans didn't do warmth, but something adjacent to respect, the acknowledgement of one's strategist for maneuvers that exceeded her models. We observed the engagement. I'm aware, Picard said. The child, she paused, made a choice about phrasing. The young man, he communicated with the Borg collective, and they responded. Yes, that has never happened before. No, Picard agreed. It hasn't. Velas was quiet for a moment. The calculation behind her eyes was visible, if you knew what to look for. Not scheming now, but genuinely processing. Updating models. Revising assumptions. The Star Empire will be in contact, she said finally, through proper diplomatic channels. She looked at Gohan, who was standing beside Picard. Something moved through her expression. Not the acquisitive appraisal of the Tal Shiar, or not the strategic assessment of a commander evaluating an asset, but something more honest and more uncomfortable. He is not what we thought he was. He rarely is, Picard said. The channel closed. The warbird cloaked, and after a moment, its warp signature faded on long-range sensors. Heading home, with something to report that would keep Romulan intelligence analyzing for months. Gohan sat down on the steps of the command platform. Just sat, the way exhausted children sit when no one is telling them to maintain decorum, and looked at the stars. Troy sat beside him, not speaking, just present. I need to get home, he said after a while. I know, she said. My mom doesn't know where I am. He stopped. She's been through enough. She can't lose me too. We're going to work on that, Picard said from above them. He hadn't moved. Mr. Data has already begun analyzing the subspace rupture that brought you here. The energy signature is distinctive. If we can reproduce the conditions, can you? Gohan looked up at him. Picard met his eyes. I don't know, he said, with the honesty that Gohan had come to identify as Picard's most characteristic quality. But we are going to try, with everything this ship has. Gohan looked at Data. I will not stop until I find an answer, Data said simply. Gohan nodded. He looked back at the stars of a universe that had no Kai, no Dragon Balls, no Saiyans, no Namekians, no Capsule Corporation, nothing familiar except people who were, in their own strange way, trying. People who had decided that trying was what they were for. Okay, he said. Okay. Worf from Tactical cleared his throat. Harsted it was a small sound from a large Klingon, and it carried more weight than it had any right to. The crew of the Enterprise, he said, formally, to the room and to the boy, will not forget what was done today. Gohan looked at him. Nor, Worf said, with the careful precision of a warrior paying the highest compliment his culture possessed, will I. The stars outside the Enterprise D's viewports were the same stars they had always been. Ancient, indifferent, burning with the slow patience of things that measure time in geological epochs. They did not know that something extraordinary had passed through this sector. They did not record it. The universe, in its vastness, keeps no official ledger of the moments that matter. People do. Son Gohan had arrived through a wound in the fabric of reality, bleeding and grieving, under carrying power that broke every instrument the Federation had built to measure such things. He had faced the calculated acquisition of the Romulan Tal Shiar, the mechanical hunger of the Borg collective, and the particular weight of a universe that had no category for what he was. And he had met each of them not with the rage that his power might have justified, but with something his father had given him that no training had taught and no transformation could replicate. The willingness to be understood before being feared. The Borg would return to their collective carrying data that would occupy their processing capacity for years. The Romulans would file reports that diplomatic analysts would argue over for a generation. And the Enterprise D would continue its mission, carrying in its crew manifest a temporary entry. Gohan, dear son, species unclassified, that data would quietly refuse to delete for as long as he served aboard. Picard would write in his log that evening, the most dangerous thing about the boy is not his power. It is his decency. In a universe that has never seen Kai, never imagined it, he chose to show it rather than wield it. His father taught him that. Whatever world produced Goku of Earth produced something the Federation would do well to understand. Gohan was not home yet. Data's calculations were ongoing, the subspace equations stubborn and complex, the dimensional mechanics resistant to easy resolution. There would be more days aboard the Enterprise, more meals that overwhelmed the replicator's portion algorithms, more conversations with Data about the nature of being different. Here more evenings in 10 Forward with Gunan, who always seemed to know what he needed before he knew he needed it. But he was not alone. And for a boy who had stood at the center of the most important moment of his world's history and carried it alone, that was not nothing. That was, perhaps, everything.